President Lee Jae-myung delivered an address to the National Assembly on Thursday, stressing the urgent need to fast-track a supplementary budget to cushion the economic fallout from the Middle East crisis. South Korea's consumer inflation accelerated to 2.2% in March, largely fueled by a sharp surge in global oil prices. U.S. President Donald Trump says Washington will strike Iran extremely hard in the coming weeks, while insisting the military campaign is nearing completion. We begin with President Lee Jae-myung's budget speech to the National Assembly. The South Korean leader urged the lawmakers to fast-track a supplementary budget to mitigate the economic fallout from the Middle East conflict, emphasizing the need for extraordinary measures to tackle the crisis. Our Blue House correspondent Song Yoo-jin reports.
President Lee Jae-myung says the government's more than $17 billion supplementary budget kept this in mind.
위기일수록 사회적 약자를 더 두텁게 보호해야 한다는 원칙과 경제 회생의 골든타임을 놓치지 않겠다는 각오 아래 총 26조 2천억 원 규모의 추가 경정 예산안을 마련했습니다.
Delivering a budget speech at the National Assembly on Thursday, President Lee described the spending plan as one that makes bold investments where they are most needed in response to the Middle East crisis, while minimizing the burden on households and businesses.
이번 추경안은 국채를 발행하지 않는 빚 없는 추경이라는 점을 분명하게 말씀드립니다. 정시 반도체 경기 호황 등에 따른 초과 세수 25조 2천억 원과 기금 자체 재원 1조를 활용할 계획입니다.
The extra budget focuses on easing the burden on consumers and businesses affected by rising oil prices, with more than 10 trillion won allocated for this. A key measure is direct cash support for some 36 million people, the bottom 70% of income earners.
소득 수준과 지역 우대 원칙에 따라 1인당 기본 10만 원에서 최대 60만 원까지 차등 지원하겠습니다. 지원금은 지역 화폐로 지급하여 지역과 골목 상권의 소상공인 자영업자에게 도움이 되고 경기 활성화에도 기여할 수 있도록 설계하였다.
President Lee also outlined plans to expand financial support for small business owners and compensate those affected by the oil price cap. Looking further ahead, he pledged to increase financing for renewable energy to reduce South Korea's heavy reliance on fossil fuels. Wrapping up his more than 15-minute address, Lee urged bipartisan support to ensure the bill's swift passage, saying that overcoming a crisis depends on speed. The National Assembly is set to review the budget next week before putting it to a vote at a plenary session. The ruling and opposition parties previously agreed to pass it by next Friday. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
And ongoing disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz are shaking local oil markets. With the fuel prices showing no sign of easing, the government has stepped up its crisis alert level. Kim Jun-hong has more.
Here at a gas station in Seoul, usually one of the cheapest in the area, gasoline and diesel are both around 1,981 per liter, approximately $1.31. Just a few days ago, drivers were lining up here to fill their tanks, but as fuel prices go higher, it has become noticeably quieter. Staff say customer numbers have dropped sharply since last Saturday when the government's new price cap took effect.
I'm trying to minimize how often I fill up my car, and if it's not really necessary, I use public transportation instead. I also run a restaurant, and it's not just the cost of gas. Ingredient prices have gone up as well, so it's really tough to run a business these days.
I drive a cargo truck, and it takes about 300 liters to fill up. But lately, it's been really hard to keep working. I even tried driving slower to cut down fuel use, but I still can't manage to fill up even half of what I normally would.
Fuel prices in South Korea have been steadily rising over the past week. The nationwide average for gasoline on Thursday is 1,921 per liter, an increase of more than 5% compared to a week ago. In Seoul, prices are even higher at 1,964 won per liter on average. Meanwhile, the government announced Wednesday that it would upgrade the energy security alert for crude oil to the second highest level starting from Thursday. The system has 4 levels based on the severity of the crisis and its impact on daily life and the economy. Since the onset of the Middle East conflict, the alert has been raised in stages roughly every 2 weeks. With the alert level raised, new guidelines have also been introduced, urging the public to use less energy. Starting next Wednesday, the public sector's vehicle rotation will be tightened from a 5-day to a 2-day system, with an odd-even schedule based on the last digit of a vehicle's license plate, limiting how often people can drive to work. A 5-day, weekday-based rotation will also apply to public parking facilities that were not previously included. As the response system moves to a higher level, the energy crisis is becoming more visible. With no immediate relief in sight, the pressure from rising fuel costs is expected to persist. Kim Junong, Arirang News.
Now, surging global oil prices also drove South Korea's consumer prices up by 2.2% in March, with petroleum products accounting for much of the increase. Kim Do-yeon has this report.
South Korea's consumer price growth accelerated to 2.2% in March, driven almost entirely by a massive spike in global oil prices. According to the Ministry of Data and Statistics on Thursday, the overall inflation rate was heavily pressured by the energy sector. Petroleum product prices surged 9.9% from a year ago, marking the fastest rise since October 2022, when oil prices rose during the war in Ukraine.
The biggest factor is the rise in global oil prices due to the situation in the Middle East. Dubai crude soared to $128 in March from $68.04 the month before. This seems to have significantly driven up our domestic fuel costs.
This near 10% jump in petroleum prices marks a sharp reversal from the previous month. In February, fuel prices had actually declined by 2.4% on year. But with food prices going up, the overall index was around the same level at 2.0%. Now, for this month, breaking down the energy shock, the impact was most severe in diesel. Diesel prices jumped 17% due to its broad use across industrial, transport, and military sectors, while gasoline rose 8%. Despite this severe external shock, the headline inflation rate was kept from spiraling further. The government's price ceilings on fuel products effectively mitigated the spike, keeping South Korea's figures lower than those of other major economies. The energy price surge was also offset by a decline in food costs, a reversal of the factors from the previous month. Overall, agricultural, livestock, and fishery prices fell 0.6%. The fresh food index saw a steeper drop of 6.6% as warmer spring weather boosted crop production. Additionally, processed food inflation slowed following factory price cuts for staple ingredients like flour and sugar. Looking ahead, the ministry warns that upward pressure is expected to persist in April as higher energy costs will inevitably reflect in international airfare and imported agricultural goods. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Now, let us welcome our Kim Do-yeon into the studio to discuss this further. Welcome, Do-yeon.
Thank you for having me.
So, Do-yeon, you mentioned the price hike of petroleum products was mitigated by the government's price cap. The question is, how did South Korea fare compared to other nations?
Right. The Ministry of Data and Statistics emphasized that, as I said in the report, the domestic fuel price surge was contained thanks to the government's price ceiling, which is currently capped at 1,934 won per liter for gasoline for refiners when they transfer it to retailers. But first, take a listen to what the official had to say.
While we are the first to release detailed March figures, looking broadly, the margin of increase is significantly slower compared to countries like the U.S. or Japan. This effect appears to be largely due to the implementation of the price ceiling.
Now, to be specific, the U.S. national average for regular gasoline, according to AAA, just topped $4 a gallon for the first time in nearly 4 years, jumping over $1 per gallon since the conflict began. U.S. diesel has also surged by roughly $1.70, and this, as I've been saying, can be thanks to the government's price ceiling.
Then, Doyon, the biggest question on everyone's mind is the Middle East conflict. Will global oil prices be tamed anytime soon?
Well, now, there are analyses about that, and a new report by the Korea Institute for International Economic Policy, or KIEP, concluded that oil prices will not return to pre-situation Middle East situation levels under any foreseeable scenario. Take a listen.
For example, even in an early ceasefire scenario, it would be $90 by the fourth quarter of 2027. The biggest reason is that supply cannot be rapidly increased. Even if the U.S. eases sanctions on Russia or tries to increase its own production, practically, it is difficult to sharply increase output in a short period.
If the current blockade of the Strait of Hormuz continues, prices could stabilize at a much higher $117. Repairing damaged Middle Eastern energy facilities will take 3 to 5 years. And even if the strait reopens, potential Iranian transit fees will likely be passed down to consumers.
Well, that doesn't sound too promising, Doyon. I have to say, what exactly can we expect for April, next month and beyond? Is it just about expensive airfares and groceries?
Well, it seems to be that it goes in much deeper. Now, as I've said before, while consumers will feel the immediate pinch in airfares and imported food this month, a massive crisis is brewing in our core industries. The conflict has severely disrupted the supply of naphtha and LNG. Following the attack on Qatar's gas complex, global naphtha prices have skyrocketed by nearly 50%. South Korea relies on the Middle East for over 34% of its naphtha, the absolute backbone of our petrochemical industry. Furthermore, Qatar is a major producer of helium, a critical component for semiconductor manufacturing. This energy shock is transforming into a severe supply chain crisis for the nation's biggest export sectors.
Indeed. Doyon, thanks for the coverage tonight.
Thank you for having me.
U.S. President Donald Trump laid out his upcoming war plans against Iran, that Washington will strike Iran extremely hard within 2 to 3 weeks. Moon Hye-ryun reports.
Thanks to the progress we've made, I can say tonight that we are on track to complete all of America's military objectives shortly, very shortly. We are going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks.
In his primetime address on Wednesday, U.S. President Donald Trump touted the progress made by Operation Epic Fury in disabling Iran's Navy, weapons factories, and missile and drone operations. He added that the U.S. operation will continue until all his objectives are met, saying that there could be severe economic pain and instability unless it is guaranteed that Iran does not obtain a nuclear weapon. Speaking on America's role in the conflict, Trump said the military action is not aimed at securing resources like oil, but at supporting U.S. allies, emphasizing that the U.S. no longer depends on the Middle East for energy. Ahead of this speech, Tehran had firmly denied Trump's claim that Iran is seeking a ceasefire. In a social media post on Wednesday, Trump said Iran's new regime president, whom he did not name, had requested a ceasefire, suggesting that any pause in fighting would depend on the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point for global energy supplies. He paired that claim with a warning of heavy strikes if conditions aren't met. But Tehran quickly pushed back. Its foreign ministry dismissed the statement as false and baseless, while the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps insisted the strategic waterway remains firmly under Iranian control and would not be reopened under pressure from Washington. That denial was followed by a direct appeal from Iran's president, who published a letter addressed to the American people just hours before Trump's scheduled address. In it, he questioned the justification for the war and argued that Iran poses no threat to warrant such military action against it. He emphasized that Tehran's actions are rooted in self-defense and suggested the United States is acting on behalf of Israel rather than its own national interest. The letter also underscored that Iran holds no hostility towards ordinary Americans, even as the conflict intensifies. Trump on Wednesday also questioned why the U.S. should secure the Strait of Hormuz, suggesting countries like South Korea, Japan, China, and European nations, which rely heavily on the route, should take on that responsibility instead. Moon Hye-ryun, Arirang News.
And in response to U.S. President Donald Trump's speech on Iran, the Blue House says South Korea hopes the situation in the Middle East will move swiftly toward peace and stability. In a written briefing on Thursday, senior Blue House spokesperson Kang Yoo-jung added that the government is closely monitoring developments involving countries related to the conflict. Kang also said that Seoul will take proactive steps to ensure the safety of Korean nationals in the region and cooperate with the international community to restore free maritime transport routes. Now dashed hopes for a swift end to the war after President Trump's address to the nation and the U.S. sent South Korea's benchmark KOSPI tumbling more than 4% today, erasing over half of the previous day's gains. Now the KOSPI closed at 5,234, down 4.47%. Foreigners and institutions drove the decline, while retail investors bought into the dip. The Korean won weakened sharply, with the exchange rate for $1 jumping over 18 won to close at 1,519.7 won. And WTI crude oil surged more than 6% in one session, breaking above $106 per barrel. In the meantime, Iran is reportedly making an audacious ask of international ships seeking to access the Strait of Hormuz. The country is calling for a toll fee, one that needs to be paid in Chinese currency or in cryptocurrency. Yoon-jin reports.
Iran has developed a plan to charge a toll to oil tankers passing through the Strait of Hormuz of approximately $1 per barrel, with payments to be made in Chinese Yuan or stablecoins, as reported by Bloomberg, citing multiple sources on Wednesday. It was reported that Iran's National Security Committee approved a bill for the measure on March 30th. Bloomberg said, according to these sources, that vessel operators would have to contact an intermediary company linked to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and provide information about the tank, including its ownership, the flag it carries, cargo manifest, destination, crew list, and data from what's called an automated identification system, which is a transponder that ships use to record and broadcast their position. The intermediary company then passes the information onto the Guard Corps' provincial command for background checks to confirm that it has no links to Israel or the U.S. or states that Iran considers enemies. Iran has a ranking system for nations from 1 to 5 that determines the friendliness of nations, with ships from more friendly countries likely to get better terms. The negotiating terms for oil tankers start at a value of $1 per barrel. Oil tankers typically have a loading capacity of around 2 million barrels, which means they would need to pay roughly $2 million in tolls. Once the toll is paid, the Guard Corps will issue an authorization code and route instructions. The ships will be expected to raise the flag of the nation that they negotiated the passage agreement with and will be escorted through the passage by a patrol boat. The legal basis of this passage, dubbed the Iranian tollbooth, remains unclear, including how sanctions may be applied. And there are also issues of what is covered by insurance, as insurance costs have spiked for tankers that want to cross the Strait of Hormuz. Yoon-jin, Arirang News.
North Korea slammed a recently passed UN human rights resolution as a political provocation, accusing the UN of bias and warning that supporting countries will pay. Our Kim Bo-kyung tells us more.
North Korea strongly condemned the UN's recent adoption of a human rights resolution against the regime, calling it a grave political provocation against the dignity and sovereignty of its own state. This was in a statement from the regime's foreign ministry spokesperson and delivered by the Korean Central News Agency on Thursday. The statement argued that the UN human rights review system specifically targeting individual states was a hostile act that violates the UN Charter's principles of sovereign equality and non-interference in internal affairs. The ministry criticized the long-term practice of adopting such resolutions against North Korea for over 20 years, saying this shows the regrettable state of the UN human rights stage that has been extremely tainted by politicization, selectivity, and double standards. It added that the most urgent task for the UN Human Rights Council today should be investigating and holding accountable hegemonic powers for what it called large-scale crimes against humanity, mentioning tragic incidents of children killed in large numbers, apparently referring to a recent U.S. attack that led to at least 175 students and teachers' deaths in an elementary school in Iran. The ministry warned that countries committing such malicious acts, which also joined in defaming the regime, would certainly have to pay for their actions. This followed the UN Human Rights Council's adoption of the resolution by consensus on March 30th, with a total of 50 countries, including South Korea, co-sponsoring the resolution.
North Korea treats human rights as an issue of sovereignty and non-interference. So while it didn't directly mention South Korea's co-sponsorship, the statement likely carries an implicit criticism.
This marked the 24th consecutive year since 2003 that a resolution on North Korean human rights has been adopted. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
President Lee Jae-myung has exchanged views on the Korean Peninsula as well as the Middle East situation during talks with U.S. lawmakers. On Thursday, he hosted a four-member bipartisan Senate delegation led by Senator Jean Shaheen from New Hampshire. The South Korean president highlighted the country's increasing spending for its own defense and the need to take back a wartime operational control from Washington to Seoul. He also touched upon the importance of talks between North Korea and the U.S., revisiting his earlier suggestion that U.S. President Donald Trump take on the role of a peacemaker while he plays as a pacemaker. Earlier this week, President Lee also met a six-member U.S. delegation consisting of members from the House of Representatives. A senior European Parliament lawmaker is calling South Korea a key partner for Europe as both sides face a more volatile security environment. Our Oh Soo-young sat down with him upon his visit to Seoul.
Brussels sees Seoul as one of its most important partners and allies, aligned strategically and in terms of values. That's according to David McAllister, chair of the European Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee, who is visiting South Korea and Japan this week, leading a seven-member delegation.
And with our visit, we would like to underline how much we appreciate, how much we value the strategic partnership with the Republic of Korea. South Korea is one of our most important bilateral partners and allies in the world.
The trip comes as tensions around Iran and the Strait of Hormuz raise concerns over shipping, supply chains and energy flows for Korea and Europe alike.
We believe in the freedom of navigation, and this includes the free passage through the Strait of Hormuz, and the effects are just as immense for South Korea as they are for Europe, so we're in this together.
The Middle East situation also comes at a time when many countries are moving to build greater strategic autonomy, meaning the ability to act more independently on defence and security. For Europe, that means higher defence spending and capability building, while maintaining close ties with Washington.
When it comes to security and defence, for instance, we need to be more on equal footing with the US within NATO. That's why we are stepping up our investments in our own security and defence. It's about strengthening the European pillar within NATO.
That shift is also opening space for more practical cooperation with South Korea.
So there's also potential for the Korean defence industry in Europe in the upcoming years when we are working step by step in establishing the European Defence Union, which a major component is, of course, that we step up our own European defence industry, but we also will continue to import excellent products from like-minded partners, including Korea.
Looking ahead, McAllister pointed to further areas for cooperation, from digital and security partnerships to joint research, with Korea as the first Asian country associated with the EU's Horizon programme. McAllister met with Deputy Foreign Minister Chung Yi-hae on Wednesday. Seoul's foreign ministry says the two sides noted that bilateral ties have developed across a wide range of areas, from the economy and trade to security, defence and people-to-people exchanges. They also discussed the situation on the Korean Peninsula, in Ukraine and in the Middle East, agreeing on the need to continue close communication at all levels going forward. 오수영 아리랑 뉴스.
Spring may feel calm and mild, but the weather can change pretty quickly. Even this week, after some nice clear days, clouds will move in tomorrow. Rain will begin on Jeju-do Island late tomorrow afternoon, then spread nationwide overnight, continuing through Saturday afternoon. As for rainfall, Jeju will see over 100 millimeters of rain in the mountainous areas. The southern regions will see 10 to 60 millimeters of rain, and the central regions will see 5 to 30 millimeters of rain. In particular, from late tomorrow night into early Saturday morning, heavy downpours of 20 to 30 millimeters per hour are expected in the mountainous areas of Jeju-do Island, accompanied by strong winds and lightning. So please take extra caution. Meanwhile, ultra-fine dust levels will be bad across the capital area, the central regions, and also parts of the southwest. Tomorrow, Seoul will start the day at 6 degrees Celsius, Chuncheon at 3 degrees, and Busan at 9 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 21 degrees. Daejeon, Daegu, Gyeongju will all top out at 22 degrees. Rain will gradually stop in the western regions by Saturday afternoon. Now here's a look at the weather around the world.
That is all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami. From all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.